This podcast is brought to you on Roku and Fire TV by PodNation Podcast TV. Find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever podcasts are broadcast. Download our app and never miss a show with video on demand, as well as exclusive content found only on PodNation TV. Live from over the Pacific Ocean, it's the Monster Island Film Vault, episode 107, The Amazing Colossal Man and War of the Colossal Beast. Hello, kaiju lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, Monster Island's soon-to-be-home traveling film curator, Nate Marchand. Indeed, Jimmy, after our long world tour, which was ordered under dubious circumstances by the Monster Island Board of Directors, we're on our way home to the island. Yes, we had a little pit stop back there for Jimmy's wedding, but now we've recaptured all the escaped kaiju, so there's nothing keeping us from returning. Except maybe contract renewals. Oh, thank Godzilla for the legal action team, keeping your boy employed since this season? Anyway, today's broadcast is our Season 4 finale. It's a long overdue Patreon-sponsored episode requested by former and future MIFV Max member Brad Batman Edelman. And just like executive producer Damon Noyes did earlier this season, it's a double feature. In fact, it's a duology. And one for which I have some potent nostalgia. 1957's The Amazing Colossal Man, and its sequel, 1958's War of the Colossal Beast. I hadn't seen either of these in years, and it was fascinating to rewatch and research them for the show. Colossal Man was the first episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000 I ever saw, and Colossal Beast, I believe, was the next episode I watched the following week. That's ironic because the former is one of the banned episodes, which is a bit depressing. More on that later. I'm not sure even the legal action team can litigate that episode back into existence. For now. As I was saying, this duology has gained some notoriety in monster and B-movie circles over the years, although a consensus on the film's merits or demerits seems impossible. Some, if not most, disregard them as typical B-movie drive-in schlock produced by AIP at the time. See episode 102 on Reptilicus for more on that. While others, like Bill Warren in Keep Watching the Skies, argue that at least the first film is, quote, better than its effects and trappings, greater than the sum of its parts, end quote. Spoiler warning, I tend to agree. However, in my research, I found some interesting stuff most scholars don't mention about these movies. Namely, that they were inspired by an obscure novel. That's because you are obscure sci-fi, Jimmy. Ugh. Anyway, believe it or not, The Amazing Colossal Man is an uncredited adaptation of The Nth Man. No, not the Marvel Comics character. The book by Homer Ian Flint. Before you hit that button, Jimmy, the title comes from the mathematical phrase nth degree, which is an algebraic term that, popularly, denotes an extremely high exponent, although the n is actually just unspecified, so it could be a large or small number. Regardless, it's definitely intended to be large in Flint's book. But aside from gigantism, the book and movie have almost nothing in common. Flint started his writing career in 1910 at age 23 at the suggestion of his wife Mabel, and he quickly found success as a short story author. He wrote some mystery, humor, and adventure, but he primarily wrote scientific romances, which is what science fiction used to be called. He wrote The Nth Man in 1920 and intended it to be sold to the Frank Munsey Company for its magazine All Story, but it wouldn't be published until 1928 in Amazing Stories Quarterly. Despite its connections to Colossal Man, it's only ever been reprinted once. When I first got Brad's Patreon request and learned of the book, I tried to track it down, but a copy eluded me for a while. I did find a 2015 reprint on Amazon, so it seems easy to come by now if any of you kaiju lovers would like to read it. I hesitate to call it a novel and liken it more to I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, which is a collection of interconnected short stories, which makes sense given that was Flint's specialty. Only a few chapters have recurring characters aside from the titular Nth Man. Most chapters are about characters experiencing strange and/or extraordinary events perpetrated by the Nth Man, such as a little girl being rescued from drowning and the Sphinx's head being placed on top of one of the pyramids of Giza, which just sounds rude. It's in the last few chapters where it becomes, as the introduction in the 2015 edition says, quote, a social and economic parable wrapped in a scientific tale of gigantism that outlived its own era due to the passion of one man, literary agent Forrest J. Ackerman, who never let go of his dream that it would make one heck of a science fiction film with a serious theme to rival that of H.G. Wells' Things to Come, end quote. I won't spoil the book, but suffice it to say, the vast differences between it and the movie could be an entire podcast unto itself, which is something I think I'll save for an MIFV Max episode on Patreon. Daniel DiManna would be a great co-host for that. The biggest key differences are the book is a pre-atomic age tale, so there's no radiation involved in the giant man's origin, and the Nth Man's goals and intentions are much more grandiose than the Colossal Man's, as in radical American government reform. No joke. Not to mention, the Nth Man is supposed to be 10 miles tall. The Colossal Man said that too, Space Cadet. One last thing I'll mention about the book, although it has no bearing on today's movies. I just thought it was interesting. Flint died under mysterious circumstances in his mid-30s. His body was found under a wrecked car 75 feet down an embankment in rural Northern California after a series of strange events. Complicating matters, it was a taxi, and the driver's story of a man threatening him with a revolver, forcing him out of the car, and stealing the car has come under great scrutiny and has been proven inconsistent. You can read all of the copious details in the introduction of the 2015 edition of the novel. That's because you cheated your weird death, Jimmy. So, The Amazing Colossal Man is the story of a soldier who is hit by a blast of radiation from a plutonium bomb and starts growing into a giant at an exponential rate, because this is the radiation is magic era of science fiction. He slowly loses his mind and falls into despair despite the intervention of his fiancée one day before marriage, and some scientists, and he eventually attacks Las Vegas. The scientists inject him with a formula to stop his growth, but it doesn't stop his rampage. The military confronts him at Hoover Dam and guns him down into the Colorado River. The film was released August 28, 1957 by AIP on double bill with Catgirl, which is still a better Catwoman movie than the one with Halle Berry. It was produced by Malibu Productions and stars Glenn Langan as Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Manning, a.k.a. the Colossal Man, Kathy Downs as Carol Forrest, Glenn's fiancée, William Hudson as Dr. Paul Lindstrom, and Larry Where's My Hammer Thor as Major Eric Coulter. But most importantly, it was directed, produced, and co-written, along with Mark Hanna and an uncredited George Worthing Yates, by Bird Eye Gordon, who also directed the special effects. Burt Ira Gordon was a B-movie filmmaker best known for such movies as King Dinosaur, 1955, Earth vs. the Spider, 1958, Village of the Giants, 1965, The Food of the Gods, 1976, and Empire of the Ants, 1977. Yeah, his films were frequently featured on MST3K. Hold on to that thought. Gordon, who was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so I wonder if Raymond knew him because our lawyer friend is from that town, was nicknamed Mr. B.I.G. by Forrest J. Ackerman because those are Gordon's initials, and most of his movies involve giant monsters brought to life on screen using rear projection. It's like he was born to do this. He made King Dinosaur as an independent feature and 1957's The Cyclops for Republic Pictures. He famously used real grasshoppers on a miniature city set to create the effects for 1957's Beginning of the End. Both of today's movies are considered part of his quote-unquote giant trilogy, the first of which was The Cyclops. Gordon died in 2023 at the ripe old age of 100. Interestingly, Gordon wasn't the first choice as director for Colossal Man. It was an even more famous B-movie director, Roger Corman. Producer and AIP co-founder James Nicholson, another name to remember for later, inspired by the success of The Incredible Shrinking Man, wanted to adapt The Nth Man, whose film rights the studio owned. Dick Miller, one of Corman's go-to actors, was supposed to be in the lead role, and Charles B. Griffith adapted the novel into a comedy. But Corman dropped out, presumably to make Attack of the Crab Monsters, which was also released in 1957. See MIFV episode 88 for a discussion of that movie. And Gordon was hired as his replacement. Gordon collaborated with Griffith on the script, but that only lasted one day before Griffith quit, so Gordon brought on his usual writing partner Marchand. Principal photography started in June 1957, and according to Warren, Colossal Man was reportedly shot in 10 days, which would explain the 2-month turnaround. The cinematography by Joe Byrock enhances the oversized props designed and built by Paul Blaisdell, which sell the Colossal Man's size better than the often shoddy rear projection, which was done by filming actors against a black background or in front of black objects. Speaking of actors, Glenn Langan, who plays Glenn Manning, who doesn't play football. It's called beating my intrepid producer to a my spirit animal joke. Anyway, he was described in the Scream Factory documentary Size Matters, Bird-Eye Gordon at AIP as giving an, quote, A movie performance in a B movie, end quote. He was a 20th Century Fox contract player in the 1940s, appearing in many of their prestige pictures, such as Margie, 1946, Dragonwyck, 1946, Forever Amber, 1947, and The Snake Pit, 1948. While his star was fading in the mid-1950s, he takes this role far more seriously than you'd expect. He shaved his head, which, coupled with his voice, would almost make me think he was Yul Brynner, and gives Manning's suffering a potent pathos. What sin could a man commit in a single lifetime to bring this upon himself, he asks, echoing Job. I often ask myself the same question. More on that possible religious interpretation later. Langan spends most of the film wandering miniature sets in an expanding sarong and sells every potentially goofy line and moment. It makes his absence in the sequel unfortunate. Something I forgot about both of these movies is what downers they are. They're rare tragedies in an era when science fiction films, no matter how dark and violent, usually ended in triumph. Even Invasion of the Body Snatchers was supposed to end as a cautionary tale until a happier ending was added. In this movie, a treatment is discovered for Manning's condition, but he's never cured. His mind succumbs to, as Terry Talks Movies puts it, vascular dementia, a condition where the brain isn't getting enough blood. Yeah, saying that Manning's heart wasn't growing as fast as the rest of him is one thing, 8 to 10 feet a day, we're told, which is crazy to begin with. But claiming the heart is a single cell just screams, I failed high school biology. Although, in their defense, the Nth Man supposedly doubled his size daily, and that was based on the rate of baby growth. Anyway, Manning goes insane, wrecks Las Vegas, making this a rare instance of that city being attacked by a kaiju, or is he a kaijin? Debate that in the comments. And murders Coulter by skewering him with a giant syringe, as you do. He does carry Carol in his hand a la King Kong, but he's convinced to put her down before he's shot by the military and falls off the Boulder Dam, aka Hoover Dam. At least she didn't die. That would have been too much. Side note, I don't know if this counts as a purely military solution to the problem because Manning was injected with the anti-growth serum, which was created by Lindstrom. The only reason we can infer that it worked is the sequel exists, which complicates matters. The giant effects in the movie aren't great, but I do think they get a bit more criticism than they deserve. Things like matte lines are visible even in big-budget Hollywood films from the time and in tokusatsu. Heck, as Jimmy is well aware, they were even in the Star Wars trilogy, and George Lucas had them removed in the so-called special editions. Hashtag triggered. He did shoot first. But as I was saying, I'm more forgiving of those effects. However, the miniature furniture by Blaisdell is better than you'd think. My favorite is when Manning tries to read what I think is a Bible, adding to a potential religious undertone, but the print is too small to read. The detail in the book, even in close-up, is surprisingly good. Admittedly, the attack on Vegas is a bit awkward. The Vegas Vic sign Manning destroys is obviously made of cardboard. Although, Manning picking up the oversized, even for him, crown from the top of the Royal Nevada might be a thematic statement. In fact, it could be summarized by a Metallica song. Here's your crown, King Nothing. There is no prestige for Manning, only despair. I know how he feels. I'm fine. Now, kaiju lovers, the best, and certainly most shocking, special effects are achieved with makeup and editing. Namely, the sequence where Manning is hit by the plutonium bomb's blast. It's an image that was branded on my brain when I watched the MST3K episode. The blast is represented with a wipe that cuts from an unharmed Manning shielding his face with his hands to a hairless Manning with charred skin and torn clothes. It's surprisingly horrific for its time. I'll unpack the possible nuclear anxiety theme in a bit, but imagery like this couldn't be used in the powerfully anti-nuclear Japan without causing controversy and a film ban. See episode 35 on Prophecies of Nostradamus for a famous example of this. If this incident sounds familiar, it should. I have little doubt that, as much as I love him, Marvel maestro Stan Lee must have seen this movie because Incredible Hulk number 1, 1962, follows the Colossal Man's origin to a suspicious T. If you don't believe me, even Don Glut posits this in the Scream Factory commentary for War of the Colossal Beast. Yes, Jimmy, assuming I heard the correct speaker. Anyway, Lee always mentioned Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson and Universal's 1931 adaptation of Frankenstein as inspiration for the Green Goliath, but the parallels between Hulk and Colossal Man can't be ignored. Both begin at a secret pseudo-nuclear weapons test, gamma bomb and plutonium bomb. Both have the protagonist rush out to save a civilian, Rick Jones and random airplane pilot. Both have said protagonists get caught in a bomb blast and mutated by radiation. The differences are Bruce Banner is a scientist while Manning is a soldier. Bruce transforms into a 10-foot, then gray but later green over-muscled brute when angry, while Manning is a slowly growing giant. Bruce succeeds at saving Rick Jones, but Manning fails to rescue the unknown pilot. I don't know if that adds more or less tragedy to his story. I'm leaning toward more. Thematically, I was surprised by Colossal Man, and so were several of the critics/essayists I read. You'd think an AI-produced mid-50s science fiction movie made for the drive-in crowd wouldn't be, as Mike Bogue puts it, quote, an unintentional polemic on nuclear testing, end quote. He says Manning's anxiety mirrors the American public's in the 1950s. He compares this to how American soldiers were told to walk across ground where a nuclear test just happened to see the effects of radiation. Bogue's uncle was one of them, and the family reported his personality changed afterward. Later in his essay on War of the Colossal Beast, he expands on this, saying that while the Colossal movies show American soldiers possibly being used as guinea pigs for the plutonium bomb test and criticizes it, in real life, such soldiers saw this as a patriotic duty. On July 9, 1957, 5 such soldiers stood under a 2-kiloton nuclear airburst 18,500 feet above them and cracked gallows humor jokes about it. They even planted a sign that read, Ground Zero, Population 5. Operation Plum Bob? That sounds like a grocery store mascot. As I was saying, Bogue added that the filmmakers at AIP were quote-unquote anti-military, which is why this sentiment is in this movie. Side note, saying that this is the first plutonium bomb test is a bit silly because every atomic bomb ran on plutonium, going all the way back to the Trinity test in 1945. That weapon was described as, quote, an implosion-designed plutonium bomb, end quote. Gordon would have known this if he'd watched Oppenheimer. Or listen to MIFV episode 60, Them versus John LeMay. Fact check complete. Christopher Stewartson argues the movie's central theme is loss of self. He goes on to say it should be read through the then prominent Christian lens. God is separate and above mankind. He is almighty with the power to create and destroy. Now, thanks to the A-bomb, mankind can destroy itself in an instant. He says, quote, you are dealing with an idea that is, as Susan Sontag put it, unsupportable psychologically, end quote. He expands on that by saying, quote, you now possess weaponry so powerful that the sacred distinction between man and God is fragile. Your command over the world around you has become immeasurable, one might say godlike. Big G, by the way. This change in status is horrifying because if you now have that sort of power that for your entire life you've believed is reserved for the Almighty, does that mean you're on God's proverbial level? If so, is there anything beyond or better than mankind? If there isn't, do the limits of power, as we understand them, lie with the fallible human race? The questions begin tumbling, and the fixture of one's cultural and individual identity cracks. You're a giant in a smaller world, end quote. The nuclear arms race, i.e. the Cold War, was jump-started just a few years before this in 1949 with the Soviets testing a bomb codenamed Joe 1 after Joseph Stalin, which I'm sure Rushbot was involved with. So America was no longer the big man on campus and was, as Stewartson put it, quote, just one of many ants waiting for the light of the magnifying glass, end quote. Glenn's size and aggression, he argues, represents that growing fear and anxiety, saying, quote, he is giant and powerful but becomes more isolated each day, as much a result of his own volition as well as his physical reality, end quote. Stewartson also says it mirrors the Cold War arms race. Manning can only watch as radiation destroys him, and humanity watched as nuclear tests escalated toward destruction. Remember how I said this movie is surprisingly bleak? Stewartson argues that if Manning is read as a proxy for America, the movie denotes an outlook, quote, that is unconvinced of an ending in the nuclear world that doesn't see mankind destroyed. The film therefore posits the idea that any nation or people with such power to annihilate cannot exist under the weight of the moral implications. To exist as a technological terror towering tall, impressive alliteration, sir, above all, invariably separates you from those below. It is a fragmented existence. With weapons to destroy humanity, have you forfeit your own, end quote. Yeah, Jimmy, this is a weighty question for something that Joel and the Bots mocked. Gives me another reason to respect old school B movies. Their sincerity often leads to surprising depth. I said depth! Pay attention! Anyway, here are my final thoughts and some trivia. The Amazing Colossal Man, while a terrible adaptation of The Nth Man and fodder for MST3K, is better than its reputation. The acting is average aside from Glenn Langan, who gives a melodramatic but A-grade performance despite spending most of the movie stomping around in a loincloth. While the superimposition effects range from average to sometimes bad, the miniature sets and props elevate the production values. But what truly makes The Amazing Colossal Man stand out from its B-movie brethren, and why many of my sources called it Bird Eye Gordon's best movie, is the surprising and possibly accidental themes on identity, both personal and national, in the anxious and rapidly changing atomic age. Sure, secret boomer. Next you'll tell me you were a Colossal man yourself once. Good Godzilla. Here's the trivia. The woman in the bathtub, that's how she's credited on Wikipedia, Manning peeps on during his Vegas rampage is played by Jean Moorhead, who was Playboy's Playmate of the Month in October 1955. No wonder she got this part. Did you have that issue, Jimmy? Your silence tells me yes! The placard for the news anchor says H. Wells, which made me snicker because it's a reference to the famous science fiction author H.G. Wells. And he published a novel titled Food of the Gods, sound familiar, which is about an experimental substance that grows chickens to gigantic size. And ends up in the local food chain, enlarging other animals like rats and wasps. It's then consumed by children who grow to 40 feet tall. Interestingly, in keeping with his seeming obsession with giants, Gordon adapted this novel not once, but twice as Village of the Giants in 1965 and again in 1976 as The Food of the Gods. The Vegas hotels seen during Manning's rampage include the Pioneer Club, the Dunes, the Sands, the Silver Slipper, and the Royal Nevada. And none are still standing today. He did wreck them. I found it interesting that the characters reference the war, which 99% of the time in this era of film is World War II, but for Manning, it's the Korean War. There's a flashback to Manning's service in said war, and it's surprisingly violent for the time. It also looks like the same place in California that will be passed off as Korea 20 years later in MASH, appropriately. The context for this flashback also seems to be ahead of its time. PTSD. PTSD is practically your middle name at this point. Anyway, back then, this condition was called shell shock, and it wasn't something the men who fought in wars typically talked about. Here, it's used not only for exposition, but also to show Manning's trauma from the plutonium bomb blast. This movie really is better than it seems. Is anyone in this movie going to address that the anti-growth serum was tested on a camel and elephant, and it shrank them? No? Do any of my sources discuss it? No? Well, I'll at least mention it. That was weird and held as many scientific implications and potential disasters as the Colossal Man. But I guess it doesn't matter, because the serum's creator was killed. Finally, Diana Darren, whose name was misspelled in the credits as Darain, is the only actor to appear in both this and the sequel. Speaking of which, let's move on to that one. I'll get to her after discussing War of the Colossal Beast. This movie was released less than a year later on June 30th, 1958 on double bill with another Gordon movie, Attack of the Puppet People. Yes, a movie about a mad scientist who shrinks people. Oh, the irony. Speaking of irony, for whatever reason, this wasn't marketed as a sequel to The Amazing Colossal Man, despite the previous movie being a box office success, earning $848,000 on a $138,000 budget. Yet the working title was Revenge of the Colossal Man, which is more accurate, but not by much. There isn't a war, and the titular character isn't seeking revenge. Regardless, the title was reportedly chosen by James Nicholson. War of the Colossal Beast picks up where The Amazing Colossal Man left off, with reports of food truck robberies and the testimony of a terrified delivery boy claiming he saw a monster. Enter Glenn Manning's sister, Joyce, who is sure her brother was washed down the Colorado River into Mexico. Eventually, the scarred and disfigured Manning is found and captured, but all attempts to rehabilitate him fail. He escapes and rampages through L.A. Joyce confronts him at the Griffith Observatory, which I recognize from childhood fave The Rocketeer, but in a moment of clarity and washed out color, Manning tragically electrocutes himself on power lines. I don't know. Is it a sad ending? Anyway, kaiju lovers, as I mentioned earlier, this movie has a completely different cast, but mostly the same crew. We have Sally Frazier as Joyce Manning, Roger Pace as Major Mark Baird, Russ Shiny Metal Arse Bender as Dr. Carmichael, Rico Alanes as Sergeant Luis Murillo, Charles Stewart as Captain Harris, George Beckwar as John Swanson, and for the title character, Duncan Dean Parkin as Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Manning / Colossal Man. Manning having a sister is a continuity error because he said in the previous movie that he had no family. It's a clear sign this should have been Carol looking for him. Heck, she isn't so much as mentioned. If Kathy Downs wasn't available, I don't know why they didn't just recast Carol with Frazier. Then again, Parkin replaces Langan as Manning, and they use prosthetic makeup to hide that fact. More on that later. I will say that Joyce is, as executive producer Damon Noyes would put it, quote-unquote, feminist forward in many ways. She's bound and determined to find and save her brother by any means necessary, and she will take exactly zero grief from anyone who tries to stop her, including men. Even when her brother's mind is clearly gone, she will not be swayed. Makes me wish I had a woman like that in my life. Don't worry about it. As I was saying, Joyce is definitely a highlight. You may recognize Frazier from elsewhere because she appeared in numerous films and TV series, including other B-movies like Roger Corman's It Conquered the World in 1956, 1958's Giant from the Unknown, and Gordon's immediate follow-up to this, Earth vs. the Spider. But she also had a bit role for Alfred Hitchcock himself in 1959's North by Northwest. She retired from acting in the 1960s and focused on raising her family on a ranch in Idaho. Honestly, though, aside from the presence of a few Mexican actors in the first half of the movie, the performers and performances are average. But we need to discuss the colossal man in the room, Dean Parkin. He previously played the titular monster in Gordon's The Cyclops, and while I haven't seen that movie, the consensus is that he basically plays the same character here, a gigantic disfigured savage in the Mexican wilderness. The heavy makeup, which I'll discuss in a moment, is used not only for horror, but also to hide that he's not Langan. Even knowing that, it mostly works. As a young man watching this on MST3K, I thought he was the same guy. The giveaway, as mentioned in a few of my sources, is that Parkin is a bit more muscular than Langan. However, there's almost nothing to Manning now. Brain trauma has reduced him to a growling brute who supposedly still has some humanity left in him. How they made his unsettling, often ear-scraping roar is something I want to know because he sounds like a sick Frankenstein. One baffling idiosyncrasy is Manning was said to be eating cattle after he escaped in Colossal Man, and that was while retaining some of his sanity. But when he's a mindless savage in Colossal Beast, all he eats is the contents of bread trucks? I think he'd be eating animals and maybe even people a la Attack on Titan. No, Jimmy, the anime and manga that has a notorious 2-part live-action adaptation directed by Shinji Iguchi. That's on the MIFV master list. As I was saying, the script doesn't give Parkin much. That isn't to say Parkin's Colossal Man isn't pitiable. He certainly is. But it's not until the end when Parkin speaks his one and only word, Joyce, that he has any characterization beyond hunger and rage. Then he spirals into despair and electrocutes himself in the promised glorious color. Not the way I'd want to go. Oh, don't worry about it. The commentary, I think it was Don Glut, compared this ending to both Rodan, 1956, and The Creature Walks Among Us, 1956, the second sequel to The Creature from the Black Lagoon, with the monster killing himself. That's a bit debatable with Rodan. Listen to MIFE episode 57 for more. It has Kaiju Kim on it. Funny enough, Bogue erroneously says Manning is the only 50s movie monster to take his own life. Oops. Quick side note, Kaiju lovers. I don't remember seeing the ending in color when it was on MST3K. This gimmick was done just to put it on the poster to lure audiences when films were quickly moving to color as the standard. Plus, color was expensive at the time. AIP didn't switch until later so they could compete. So the tagline technically isn't inaccurate, but it is misleading. AIP did that in 2 other movies in 1957, How to Make a Monster and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Now, the makeup, which was created by Jack Young, who also worked on The Cyclops, The Wizard of Oz, and, later on, Apocalypse Now and Salem's Lot, was frequently praised in my sources. Don Glut spoke highly of it in the Blu-ray commentary, and Bo called it one of the best makeups of 50s monster movies. While Young's makeup for Parkin and the Cyclops looked like putty, Warren noted that here it's a rare instance of quote-unquote subtractive makeup, i.e. it creates the illusion of something missing. In this case, Manning's right eye and cheek. These authors certainly liked the effect because Parkin's Colossal Man is part of the menagerie of monsters on the covers of their books. Even when I saw this in the comedic context of MST3K as a kid, I was struck by how uncharacteristically gruesome and horrific it was for its time. This was made to be shown in drive-ins, and Gordon took full advantage of relaxed Hays Code rules for such movies. So, strange as it may seem, while Colossal Man survived on its impressive miniature props and Langen's performance, which were recycled as stock footage, more on that shortly, this one became iconic thanks to the makeup. Patience, Jimmy. I'll get to that. Unfortunately, this is a vastly inferior sequel. It's 11 minutes shorter, and at least 10 minutes of it, as I said, is stock footage from Colossal Man. Manning is now a monster and not a character, and while Fraser's Joyce adds some pathos, this script is far more about thrills than the themes of personhood and mental illness found in its predecessor. Warren even called this one of Gordon's worst movies because, he argues, Gordon didn't care. But he also says Gordon was unknowingly inept in all departments. And I tend to err a bit more on that side. The script is full of errors in science and geography. The Colorado River does flow into Mexico, but it's over rough terrain that would hamper a giant body floating down there, and even its own continuity. Carol appears in the PTSD flashback, but as I said, she's never named. Manning's oversized heart condition is also dropped. Maybe a biologist wrote Gordon a letter telling him it wasn't a single cell. But I did ask myself how the condition didn't kill Manning before the military found him and why they didn't consider letting him die to speed up their studies after capturing him. I don't know if it was an oversight or disregard. The special effects are arguably a bit better, such as the distance shots of Manning threatening to smash a school bus full of prepubescent teenagers, which made for a good poster, while others look bad due to the rushed production. Good point, Jimmy. Every Bird-Eye Gordon was probably rushed. However, kaiju lovers, the script's most interesting yet baffling feature is the satirical bureaucratic chain the characters wade through when trying to find a government department to handle Manning. Don Glut likened it to Shin Godzilla. That's perhaps a bit generous, but it tracks. It goes to show that bureaucracy is a timeless and universal problem. My final thoughts? War of the Colossal Beast is a downgrade from the amazing Colossal Man in almost every way. It lacks most of the pathos of Colossal Man and instead strives only to be an atomic monster movie. It's the definition of cash grab sequel, except AIP acted like it wasn't a sequel, which is just bizarre. Perhaps Glenn Manning should have stayed dead at the bottom of Hoover Dam. Hey, my scathing review is nothing compared to what Warren said when he ended his essay on Colossal Beast. Quote, "Heaven help us if bad movie aficionados ever discover Bird-Eye Gordon," end quote. Joke's on him! MST3K made everyone aware years before he wrote his book. And now that's the only one of the two Colossal movies they can show. There, you happy, Jimmy? I'm going to talk about Susan Hart. I don't need my own PTSD flashbacks to WHG3. Susan Hart, born Dorothy Neidhart, is an actress who appeared in such quote-unquote classics as The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini, Pajama Party, and even alongside Vincent Price in Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine. You're welcome, Danny. but she's best known for being the widow of AIP co-founder James H. Nicholson and being a royal pain for Misties. Hart and Nicholson married in 1964, and Nicholson died in 1973, at which time she inherited the rights to 11 AIP films. It Conquered the World, and its 1966 remake Zontar, The Thing from Venus, Invasion of the Saucermen, 1957, and its 1965 remake The Eye Creatures, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, also released in 1957, The Amazing Colossal Man, Terror from the Year 5000, 1958, Apache Woman, 1955, The Oklahoma Woman, 1956, and Naked Paradise, 1957. Why only those? I don't know. Half of those, It Conquered, Teenage Frankenstein, Teenage Werewolf, Year 5000, and most relevantly, Colossal Man, were featured on MST3K and are now vaulted episodes that have never been officially released on DVD or streaming. Why? Long story short, in the 1990s, Hart started enforcing her claims on these films, disallowing them from being released on any home media format. She's notoriously litigious and difficult to work with. In particular, this has hampered MST3K, who riffed the ones I mentioned, quote-unquote, without permission. In 2015, Shout Factory, now Shout Studios, produced a documentary on AIP for the Volume 34 DVD of MST3K, which used stills from these movies, and Hart sued them. The lawsuit came to nothing, and from what I can tell, Hart and Shout have remained in negotiations over licensing these films ever since. It may remain this way until Hart dies. In the meantime, you can only watch the Colossal Beast episode of MST3K and buy the movie on Blu-ray. Yes, only the inferior sequel. Although I did acquire a DVD copy for the Film Vault, but it looked worse than the unofficial YouTube uploads. Then I discovered a company called Hayden Entertainment, no Y, so it's not owned by my friend Nick Hayden, released it on Blu-ray and DVD. I bought a copy. It certainly looks better. If it's a bootleg, as I suspect it is, it goes out of its way to look legit. So, there you have it. The strange duology that is The Amazing Colossal Man and War of the Colossal Beast. Thanks again to former MIFV Max member Brad Batman Edelman for sponsoring this episode. I hope you're able to rejoin Patreon soon. We'd love to have you back. We'll talk more about Patreon and listener feedback after these messages. Well, there go the final episodes of Power Trip and Henshin Men. Nice try blowing them up, Rito and Junior. Anyway, I'm going to miss these podcasts.
Not as much as me.
Or me.
Huh? Chris? Jake? What the heck shit are you doing here?
To tell you, you cannot stop podcasting about Tokusatsu.
But I'm still doing the Monster Island Film Vault.
No. We want more Henshin heroes, especially with more getting released outside of Japan.
You're right, guys. We need Henshin Power now! That's right, listeners. Henshin Men and the Power Trip are combining like Zords to create
Henshin Power V3.
Where three friends have 3 minutes to talk about Tokusatsu.
We'll pick up where those other shows left off with episode-by-episode coverage of Henshin Hero Television.
But just like Ultraman, we'll only have 3 minutes to discuss each TV episode.
Which means we'll be talking about 5 to 10 TV episodes on each of our podcast episodes.
Whether the series is live action or animated, if it has a transforming superhero and wasn't covered in the other 2 shows, it's eligible for this new podcast.
The heroes of the internet will be happy to know Henshin Men's trademark awards for things like the best stunt or fight scene and craziest moments are returning, with 2 new awards being added.
And the listeners with attitude will love that the Power Trip's popular thematic discussion and infamous Rant Master will also carry over.
So join us Ultraman Day, July 10th, 2024, and then every first and third Wednesday each month for a brand new Tokusatsu journey. You can even vote on which series we cover first.
It's Morphin' Time.
It'll be Henshin credible.
Watch your favorite podcatcher. Welcome back. As we wrap up the world tour on our way back to Monster Island, it's time to get our last listener feedback of Season 4. And ever. First, we have a short email from Gojira91. It says, "Hey Nathan, been listening to your podcast for the past weeks, and I gotta say, I really enjoy listening to your show and what you do to provide information, as well as critique, the films you talk about in each of your episodes. I'm a little far behind, but I'm keeping up with what I have been listening to, as well as going back to rewatching said films and looking back at them in a different but positive perspective. Keep up the good work, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Sincerely yours, Noah Bearden." Oh, so I forgot his actual real name was at the end there. Alrighty then. But thank you very much. That is a nice, sweet little email letting me know that you're not only you're enjoying the show, but you're reevaluating all of these movies, which I very much appreciate that. Even though I will admit, I'm not always nice to all of them. I'm thinking of a few right now that just about broke me on the air. No, don't mention that one. And it's unmentionables. Why? I don't care if the show got hijacked by someone, all right? Okay? I don't want to talk about show hijacks right now, all right? And I was surprised you wouldn't even talk about it because you got karate chopped when that happened. No, you could karate chopped him, I should say. Oh, that's why it's a positive experience for you. Okay, whatever. But thank you, Noah. I hope that I'm curious to find out where you are in your viewing of the show. Just to see how far behind you are. I'd be curious to hear what were the most interesting episodes for you and whatnot. Send some more feedback. I would love to read it on the air, assuming the show is still on after this season because of contracts. Okay, let's not get too far into the weeds there. Next, we have a comment on the YouTube version of episode 102, Reptilicus versus Damon Noyes. Yeah, that's why I had to split it into 2 parts for YouTube. This comment was posted on part 1. It's from friend of the podcast, frequent guest, and fellow writer, Neil Reeby. He says, "To build on Damon's plot idea where one of the sisters dies and Sven ends up with the survivor, the sister who dies should be the one he is developing a preference for. That would rev up the tension. Sven has to ask himself, am I willing to settle for the girl I consider second best?" So, for a little bit of context there, that was part of the long discussion that Damon and I had about Reptilicus, and we were talking about how we could make this more interesting, how we could make the interaction between the kaiju and human plot lines more meaningful. And one that Damon had was that one of the sisters should die, which puts Sven in an interesting pickle. And I like the expansion that Neil has with this, because I think that would create some great tension, but it's great dramatic tension, and keep things interesting on the human side of things, especially as all the kaiju shenanigans continue to go along. Seems to be a thing that Damon and I like to do. You give us a bad kaiju movie, and we basically script doctor the thing into something good. If you want to hear us really go to town on something like that, hashtag Project Snakebat, go listen to the MIFV Max episode on Reptilicus's pseudo remake from 2009, the Sci-Fi Channel movie, or Sci-Fi Channel movie, Reptosaurus. You really get to hear us script doctor something and actually make it good. So, thanks again, Neil. Keep leaving comments. I will definitely be bringing up, more of your insights, not only with you as a guest, but also with your feedback. And finally, we have this email from MIFV Max member Michael Watson, which says, "Hi, Nate. Hope you're well. Just getting in touch, as in March last year, I did 2 months of your season pass to sponsor and join you for a review of the Asylum's Jack the Giant Killer. Was just wondering when it would be appearing on the schedule/recording. Would look to happen so I can schedule it in. Loving the podcast as always. All the best, Michael Watson. Now, I did send him a quick little reply saying, hey, Michael, I haven't forgotten. It's slated for season 5. I'm excited to speak with you about working for the asylum. And then he wrote back and said, amazing, I can't wait. Thanks for being so quick to reply. Was listening to the latest episode this morning, and since you're in my neck of the woods in the UK on the tour, it reminded me to ask. I'll wave if I see Uber Mogra flying by. All the best, Michael Watson. Yeah, I am ecstatic for him to come on. It will be a bonus episode since I decided to add some because, there been some delays with the with production and all that. We've been very busy recapturing kaiju, lately. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to provide some unique insights as this we'll be discussing a movie that he actually worked on, which is just crazy to think right there, and get some inside baseball on what it's like to work with the asylum. Because I will say right now, when he made this request, he said that this was both the best and worst times of his life. So, he actually works in the film industry. So this is going to be a tremendous episode. I can't wait to do that one. Again, assuming I have a show. Oh, okay. You're right, Jimmy. You're right, Jimmy. I shouldn't be so negative. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Everything will be fine, right? Right? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. We're good. Yeah, thank you. All right, today was a Patreon-sponsored episode, so now it's time for the Patreon shout-outs!
I shall ask thee once again, will you chant my name?
Danny DiManna! Damon Noyes, our executive producer. The Salcast! Eric Anderson of Nerd Chapel. Wynja, Hiya! The Ninja. Christopher Riner, one of my co-hosts on Henshin Power V3, the Redeemed Otaku Podcast. Eli Harris, my other co-host on HPV3, Jake Hambrick, Matt Walsh, but not that Matt Walsh, Jonathan Courtright, who might be my craziest fan, just saying, Leon Campbell, Michael Watson, Edwin Gonzalez, Eric Pearl, Sam Allred, and finally, TofuFury! Oh, man. These shout-outs are gonna kill me if I'm not careful. Yeah, sure. Get me a cough drop later. We gotta finish some things up here. So, as I was saying, you too can get shoutouts like this and other perks like early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, an exclusive monthly podcast, and bonus blooper audio by joining MIFV Max on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Get it while it lasts. Now it's time for the trademark and meme-tastic shameless self-promotion. For details on how to join MIFV Max or send us feedback and get our socials, listen to the credits, because you should always listen to the credits, or read the show notes, because you should always read the show notes. Check out my spinoff/sister podcast, Henshin Power V3, where 3 friends have 3 minutes to talk about tokusatsu. Those friends are my co-hosts, Christopher Riner and Jake Hambrick, as I mentioned. It's perfect for you Henshin Hero television fans. Our first season should be wrapping up soon. I'm also a member of Scyther Podcast stable of actors and writers. And you can hear me as my former roommate Rito on Power Rangers the audio drama. of all people, Deadpool on X-Men the audio drama, and Johnny Storm, baby, on Avengers the audio drama. Finally, there's my author website, nathanjsmarchand.com, where you can find links to buy my books on Amazon and keep up with the latest things in my writing life. Said books include my kaiju novella Destroyer, which I co-wrote with Natasha Hayden and Timothy Deal, and an essay on Monster from Green Hell I contributed to the Rondo Award-nominated Giant Bug Cinema. I'm also a contributing writer to Kaiju United, the premier kaiju website on the internet. All right, Jimmy, cue the... Season 5? Oh! Once we get back to Monster Island, we jump right into Season 5. Yes, we start the Ultra Journey, where we will be highlighting the best movies in Japan's biggest media franchise, the Ultra series, which is on the verge of its 60th anniversary. As Subaraya Productions pushes Ultraman into an international brand, our celebration starts with Ultraman, The Adventure Begins, which will have them cellcast boys Drew Dodgen and Jacob Herron, because this film is an animated co-production between Supro and Hanna-Barbera. No joke. Then our first Godzilla Redux of Season 5 concludes our coverage of the Showa era with my first G film, Terror of Mechagodzilla, which will feature not one, but two so-called gatekeepers, Jack G-Man Hudgens and Elijah Kaiju Conversation Thomas. Check the MIFV website for a full list of upcoming episodes and tentative guests. Link in the show notes. We'll be home that soon? Okay. I guess I'll call Raymond and Gary about my contract negotiations. Maybe. Jimmy! Cue the credits! Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nate Marchand. Our executive producer is Damon Noyes. If you want to be heard on the show, we'd love to hear from you, so email us at monsterislandfilmvault@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter and our many colorful characters using the links in the show notes, which are on our website, monsterislandfilmvault.com. Don't forget to join our official Facebook group and Discord server, The Markalite Lounge. Our podcast logo was designed by Rebecca Hudgens. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram at super_r_illustrations. Sound effects sourced from freesound.org and created by JP Gant. Our theme song is Wanderer on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrono, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack and The Opened Way by Kawatani from Shadow of the Colossus. Additional music includes Every Country Has a Monster, performed by Jonah Ray, and Chant My Name, a cover by Second Archive of the song by Masaki Endo. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and/or Podchaser to spread the word about the show. You can even support us by joining MIFV Max on Patreon. MIFV is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production and a proud member of Pod Nation. Sayonara!